For my thoughts on all the latest happenings in the NFL in a completely relaxed, unscripted format, be sure to check out my channel, JG9 News. And now, on with our feature presentation. I want to give you a hypothetical scenario. Suppose you're taking a driver's test. You know the drill with these tests. You get in the car with an instructor, and you have to drive around and show that you can do various things like use your turn signal, obey the speed limit, come to a full stop at stop signs, make three-point turns, parallel park, and the whole 9 yards. You know, things that drivers don't do once they pass the driving test. Well, this test goes absolutely terribly for you. You hit the curb on the parallel park. You don't use your turn signal appropriately. You don't come to a full stop. You go 15 miles an hour over the speed limit. Basically, everything that could go wrong for this test for you does, and it shows that you have no idea how to drive and were not ready to take the test. So naturally, you fail the examination. A week later, you call up the DMV and you say, I know I failed the test a week ago, but I was practicing at home, and when I practiced, I was able to execute a three-point turn. You don't provide any proof. There is no video or testimony from one of the official instructors. You just call them up and you say, yeah, I improved. Do you get your license right then and there? Do they say, you know what? I believe you. Here's your license. Of course not. That's not how this works. You can't just go on the honor system with something like this. You can't just have a situation where you completely bomb the in-person test. Then you call up the organization afterwards and say that you did the thing you didn't do beforehand, you provide no proof whatsoever of you doing said thing, and they just take your word at face value. That seems like something that you shouldn't do. But one thing that you should do is hit that like button down below and subscribe. We're trying to reach 60,000 subscribers and build the best football community on the platform to talk about the weird and wacky history of the NFL. So your support will be greatly appreciated. And thanks in advance. Well, I bring all of that up because, amazingly enough, this happened to this man right here. This is running back Ed Marinaro, a former second-round pick of the Minnesota Vikings. You might remember him best for his time off the field, where he was a prominent actor and was a series regular on the NBC show Hill Street Blues, which was one of the biggest shows of the 1980s and had one of the best themes of the 1980s, if I do say so myself. You might remember him best for his time on the field, where, at least in part, he helped the Vikings be one of the most formidable teams of the decade, and where, while playing at Cornell in college, he finished second in the Heisman voting in 1971, and was inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame. However, what you might not remember about Marinaro is his time with the Seattle Seahawks, which came about in an absolutely bizarre situation, where Marinaro bombed the physical and did just about everything wrong, and then, a few days later, got signed because of the honor system. Seriously. Because this is the story behind Ed Marinaro and one of the craziest signings in the near decade-long history of the Seattle Seahawks franchise. Before I talk about the actual incident in question, we need some context to understand just who Ed Marinaro is, and why the Seahawks were even interested in him in the first place. When people talk about some of the best receiving backs of the mid-70s, it's tough to have that conversation without talking about this man right here, Ed Marinaro. No, he didn't get a lot of carries and rushing attempts, which is understandable, seeing how stacked that backfield in Minnesota was, as you had guys like Chuck Foreman, Dave Osborne, and Oscar Reed who were also getting carries with the team. However, where Marinaro made his presence felt in Minnesota over his 4 years there was as a receiver, as he became a go-to target for Fran Tarkenton in the short field. If he needed to check it down, or he saw the defense not covering a particular side of the field, that was where Marinaro had his time to shine. During the 1975 season, Marinaro had 54 receptions, which was not just the 6th most in the NFL that season, but was the 3rd most in the league by any running back, only behind Lionel Mitchell of the Baltimore Colts and, oddly enough, his own teammate with the Vikings, Chuck Foreman. That season, Marinaro also had 820 yards from scrimmage, which was the 2nd most on the team behind the aforementioned Chuck Foreman, and he was an instrumental part in helping the Vikings go 12-2 and win the NFC Central to advance to the playoffs yet again, as they seemingly did just about every year during the 1970s. Just don't ask a Viking fan what happened that year in the postseason. At a time where running backs weren't really known for their catching ability and weren't necessarily expected to be threats in that phase of the game, as that was the receiver's job, Marinaro proved to be extremely valuable and versatile. From 1972 to 75, he was one of just 9 running backs in football to have at least 125 receptions. And in terms of running backs to have at least 125 catches and 7 receiving touchdowns, so just under 2 per year, there were only 6. Lydell Mitchell, Chuck Foreman, Ron Johnson, Larry Brown, Floyd Little, and of course, Ed Marinaro. Not bad company to be in, if I do say so myself. However, even though Marinaro was a very solid player in Minnesota, one injury can change everything, especially for a running back. In 1976, Marinaro, after playing out his option with the Vikings, found himself on his hometown team, the New York Jets, and with an increased workload, was looking like one of the better running backs in football, having nearly 500 yards from scrimmage over his first 6 games, including back-to-back games with over 100 yards rushing, something he never did in Minnesota even once. But after injuring his foot in the middle of the season, he missed the rest of the year, and when the 1977 season rolled around in New York with a new coaching staff, Marinaro never quite recovered from that injury. He had lost some explosion due to the bone separation in his foot, and didn't look like the same player he once was. With that, the Jets cut him, and Marinaro was without a team for the first half of the 1977 season. He was 2 years removed from being one of the best receiving backs in football, and a valuable asset to any team. And now, he was viewed as washed up, injury-prone, explosion lacking, unable to play, and past his prime. It seemed like no team at this point would be desperate enough to take Marinaro due to his injury history and his lackluster preseason. And then came the Seattle Seahawks, who were in their second year of existence by this point. The Seahawks had some talent at the running back position, and they actually finished the year with the 4th most yards per carry in the league. But they needed some depth pretty badly after Tony Benjamin, their 6th-round pick out of Duke who had played in each of the first 6 games, was ruled out for the year with torn cartilage in his left knee, which required surgery. Would Marinaro be playing a whole lot? Probably not. He would have been the 4th or, at best, the 3rd option for the Seahawks at running back. But this was a chance for Marinaro to get back into the NFL. The Seahawks were looking for bodies at that position, and this man right here, Ed Marinaro, was a living, breathing body. Said Marinaro on possibly joining the team, "The Seahawks called me last week. I'm living in New York City, and that's where they telephoned me. If I pass this tryout, I'll go back to New York to play against the Jets this week. If I don't, I'll go back too." Head coach Jack Patera was cautiously optimistic about bringing on Marinaro, saying, "An awful lot is being made of his tryout. We will look to see if he can help us. We haven't even signed him. All I've done is talk to him for a few minutes, and Ed said he physically feels able to play." Basically, if Marinaro could help the team out, he'd be on. If he looked good in the tryout and looked like the Marinaro of old, he'd be on the team. As for how the tryout went, it was an unmitigated disaster. Because even though the Seahawks needed a running back, and even though they were interested at first, they were appalled at how bad he looked, and they refused to sign him. And it wasn't a matter of Marinaro not coming to terms with the team on money or anything like that, or another running back being tried out at the same time that was better. The Seahawks, despite needing a running back, and despite auditioning no one else, would have rather gone through the remainder of the season with no one than sign Marinaro. Said head coach Jack Patera, "It would be a disservice to bring in a guy in that condition and sign him to a contract." A Seahawk official said on the workout, "He was tested for speed, quickness, and agility. All the things you test any running back for. It was just a matter of him being way out of shape." Marinaro tried to be ready for this moment by exercising during the season at the New York Athletic Club, but it clearly did not work, because as Patera said, he wasn't in very good shape. He got tired so quickly. A Seahawk official said, quite bluntly, that Marinaro was not signed due to physical condition, which is always a good sign. How bad was the tryout besides everything I mentioned? Apparently, when he did the 40-yard dash, he clocked in at 5.2. For some perspective on how slow a 5.2 40 is, the average defensive tackle at the NFL Combine runs somewhere in the ballpark of 5.06 seconds. And here was Marinaro, more than a tenth of a second slower than the fattest 300-pound defensive lineman. He was running like an offensive lineman. Heck, Tom Brady at the NFL Combine in 2000 ran a 5.17. Ed Marinaro, a running back whose job it is to run fast, ran slower than Tom freaking Brady, which tells you everything you need to know about the shape he was in. So that seems like the end of the story, right? Marinaro bombs the tryout, and the Seahawks don't sign him as a result. However, a few days later, the Seahawks changed their mind and decided to sign this man right here, meaning that Ed Marinaro would be playing in Seattle after all. Marinaro was determined to play on an NFL team in 1977 and did not want to see his playing career end just yet, so he kept working out, staying in the Pacific Northwest and working out on his own at Seattle Pacific College. That's important. He was working out on his own, not in front of any Seahawks scout or any Seahawk coach. He was on his own. A coach at the college clocked him running the 40-yard dash at 4.7 seconds, which is still not great, but it's way better than 5.2. And it's decent when you consider the fact that Marinaro was never the fastest running back in the world. Again, this was a hand-timed 40-yard dash by a completely unaffiliated party with the Seahawks. When Marinaro got wind of this, he called up the Seahawks, told the Seahawks that he ran a 4.7, and then the Seahawks just took his word for it that he somehow shaved half a second off his 40 time in a few days. They invited him to the facility, and they signed him on the spot. Seriously, the Seahawks signed a guy off the honor system. The Seahawks signed a guy off the 5-year-old defense of, I didn't steal the cookies from the cookie jar. You've got to believe me. And I'm not even exaggerating when I say that. That was literally how it went down. The Seahawks just took Marinaro's word for it that he was in better shape than he was a few days ago. Said Marinaro, I had a coach at the college clock me for the 40, and I ran a 4.7. Last week, I ran 5.2. I called the Seahawks and told them about it. They asked me for a talk, and they said they'd take me. It was that simple. And the Seahawks did not refute this statement. Can you imagine that? They didn't even try him out a second time to see if he was telling the truth. They didn't even try to verify this. For all we know, he could have made this up. He could have run a 5.2 or even slower. This is like if it's my dream to play football for the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I write an email to the team saying, you guys should sign me because I can run a 4.3 40. And I submit no tape and no footage and no proof of me running the 4.3. And they just take my word for it and immediately give me a contract and a uniform. And I want to make it extremely clear. I'm not against giving guys second chances and giving them a second audition or tryout. That is not at all what this is about. Everybody has an off day. Heck, there are certain days at the gym where you probably can't lift as heavy as you'd like. There are certain days where you can't hit the high notes the way you usually do. It happens. It's the fact that the Seahawks just took his word for it without even testing it. Marinaro ran a 5.2 and was out of shape. He said a few days later, I ran a 4.7 and am in shape. The Seahawks said, that's great, you're hired. And that was that. It's like if you're auditioning for a play and you flub all the lines, and a few days later, you call up the director and you say, I memorized my lines. And the director takes your word for it and says that you've got the part, without even asking you to go over the lines. If Marinaro called up the Seahawks, said that he ran a 4.7, and then the Seahawks gave him another tryout and he ran the 4.7 there, then this is a non-story. It's the fact that the Seahawks, a professional football team, literally signed a man off of the honor system that is absolutely insane. And this was the better of the two expansion teams. And by a mile, I might add. And look, I'm not saying that Ed Marinaro faked this. I'm not suggesting that in the slightest bit. Maybe he did run a 4.7. Maybe he did shave half a second off his 40 time. And maybe he did get in game shape. He was signed by the Seahawks and he stayed on the roster for the remainder of the season, so you have to figure he would have been exposed as being out of shape and not as fast if he did lie about this. The truth would have come out. So maybe he was telling the truth. I'm inclined to believe him. It's the fact that the Seahawks just magically signed him and took his word for it without giving him another tryout. They just signed a guy off the honor system. That's the insane part in all this to me. Now, Ed Marinaro did next to nothing for the rest of his career. He played the 1977 season, the second half of it at least, with this team behind me right here in the Seattle Seahawks, but he did nothing in Seattle. He appeared in one game, and he never touched the ball once. He then played for the Chicago Bears in 1978 during the preseason, but after a lackluster preseason there, was cut, and his playing career was done, as he left the NFL to pursue a career in acting. Then again, I'm not sure any other team would have signed him. Now, you might notice all the Seahawks helmets behind me right here, but there is one lone Viking helmet. And that's because this Viking helmet, oddly enough, is signed by none other than Ed Marinaro himself. It's a cool little piece of history for the studio. So as a word to the wise for any teams and general managers out there who might be watching this video for whatever reason, number one, if you do want to take my word for it that I run a 4.3 and want to hand me a multi-million-dollar contract, I'm not going to say no. But number two, if you're going to sign a player who flunked his tryout, maybe it's a good idea to, try the guy out again and not just take his word for it that he magically improved. Just like you wouldn't give a passing grade to a student who failed the test, but comes back and says that he learned the material, yet offers no proof of learning said material, and just like you wouldn't hire a coder who fails the coding section of your application, but comes back and says that he learned how to code, yet offers no proof of sufficient coding knowledge, you wouldn't sign a guy who just says he's good to go when he showed otherwise a few days ago. Because in 1977, when it came to this man right here, Ed Marinaro, let's just say that at least at this point in his career, he was a way better actor than he was a football player. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.